This is not so much a tutorial, but more of a walkthrough of my process painting this beautiful scene in gouache paint. I'm going to go through the painting and just describe my thoughts and approach throughout the painting. And you may be able to pick up a few things that you'd like to try out in your painting as well. Gouache is a fantastic medium. If you haven't tried it, please do so. You'll also find some links in the description as well to my gouache materials. Okay, let's begin. This is the really beautiful reference, this little cottage at the end of this lane. These are my standard gouache colors that I'll use, mostly Winsor and Newton. I'm working on a 300 gram cold press paper. This is a Fabriano book that I use, and I'm removing some of the toning that I've put in where the lighter shapes are going to go. I just toned it with a little bit of red and yellow, as you can see. And now I'm going to do a little bit of drawing with a rigger brush using some ultramarine blue. I don't normally do a drawing like this, but there's quite a lot in this scene. And a little bit of drawing with settling the composition and perspective can be helpful. So don't worry about that. If it's a simple few shapes, you can go straight in with a big brush and put those big shapes in. But a little bit of a guideline is useful. I have homed in on the buildings a little more compared to the reference. And that's just to make the scene a little more personal or intimate, as they say. Instead of having a lot of the road in the foreground, I've cut that out somewhat and get in more of the interesting bits. Now with that composition sorted out, I get the larger brush. I'm just using a synthetic flat and getting some of the dark shapes in. With gouache you can work in a similar way to oils or acrylics. Start with your big dark shapes, put those basics in, a bit of ultramarine, a touch of deep yellow, even a touch of alizarin or burnt sienna with your ultramarine gives you a very nice transparent dark. Shadow pattern, always nice to start with that as well. Especially if you're painting outdoors, you want to record that shadow very quickly. But even working in the studio, it's nice to get the big shadow shapes in and other large dark shapes. And now moving into more middle value shapes. And these are the foundations of the bushes and shrubs and trees. You may look at them and say, well, they're in direct sunlight. Why don't I just start with a light color? But the light shapes are built on top of the dark shapes. And with trees and things like that, I do like to get a bit of that structure in place. Let that settle down and then go over it later. Now I've put the lights in. The sky, titanium with a touch of cerulean blue. The building now on the right hand side, titanium with a touch of yellow ochre. And trying to block those shapes in very roughly. It's a super complex building because it's one of these old Victorian buildings that populate a lot of the small towns in South Africa. Maybe if you're in Australia, you'll see similar things as well. So I need to simplify all of that. Now while I let the building colors settle, I'll do a few colors elsewhere, then come back to the building. In this way I can work the entire painting just doing different parts of it while other parts are drying slightly. These shadows, adding alizarin and burnt sienna, but no white paint, at least not yet. The shadows have very little white, if at all. Some strong lights now in the building at the end. And because of the composition lines of the road, the building at the end there is the focal point. The building on the right is a secondary point of interest. Light and shadow. The shadow shapes, not too dark, but they are still shadows, so I must make them cooler and darker than the shapes in light. And for the most part, I'm using a violet color for that. A blue-violet, for instance, is cool and dark enough and still remains colorful. I don't want shadows to be black. They must still have information, visible information. These beautiful bougainvilleas we find all over this little village. This village called Carlitsdorp in the Karoo region of South Africa. Amazing collection of bougainvilleas all over the town. So I'm using cool reds for the bougainvilleas, so a bit more alizarin, a touch of red light, and a very little bit of white. Okay, let's start blocking in a few more of the middle values and other lights as well. Very attractive green with cerulean and lemon yellow, touch of white. When I say a touch of white, it's important because the white paint, as with acrylics, is extremely cold and strong, and it can destroy your color. So you use just enough white to make the color opaque, but not to destroy it and lose its vibrancy. In the foreground road, the lights have a touch of red, yellow and white. It's a hint of a pinkish orange. You don't want to just use white, it's too cold. You must warm that white color up. A little more yellow coming into the foreground here, as I want to just lift that up in color temperature. So this is pretty much the blocking in done. And from this point on, I start finessing the shapes, making them a little smaller or adding more paint. Suggestions of details like I'm doing here with pillars and the other little architectural details. However, I would rather scumble the paint and get a light or an impression of light by dragging some paint and creating a bit of a scumble effect. I'd prefer that than getting a little tiny brush and painting lots of details. So even with a brush like this, you can make small shapes and large shapes. A flat brush is extremely versatile. Just use the brush by varying its angle to the paper. Okay, this is lemon yellow with a little more white paint in it to get a light yellow, which acts as a highlight. So this is what I meant in the beginning by bringing the highlights in later over your middle value or dark shapes where it's required. these pink colors are warmer, so they'll also suggest some highlight, but it's mostly variety of shapes. I just want slightly cool and warm shapes next to each other, and slight variations as well in color temperature. Refining a few of the shapes around the house. These are the succulents and plants like that growing in front of the building, which is an excuse to add a nice touch of turquoise blue. In this case, just a light cerulean to create a bit of turquoise. Scumbling these lights now as well to suggest broken color. A few stronger highlights. And you notice the highlights on the roof of the building, almost a white and a touch of blue to it. But it also is a sort of a reference to high key as well. The buildings are in a high key, in other words, very light colors, and that emphasizes the effect of bright light bouncing off these buildings. Kind of a feeling of putting on your sunglasses. That's what I'm after. Steadily refining shapes and making them a little more rendered, not very detailed, but yeah, for instance, I want to suggest the roof and the overhanging roof, the veranda roof, a suggestion of where the door is, etc. More than that, though, I'm not too worried, as long as you can figure it out when you look at it. Little touches of texture to suggest the roof lines also help with that effect. I want the sky a little warmer, so white, blue, and a touch of yellow. We need to suggest more information in the shadows on the left. You can see quite a lot of things happening in the reference there. There's palm tree fronds hanging over and all sorts of things. I'm just looking for shapes of color to put down. So we're starting to pull the painting together. I've got the shadows to do on the left. And with these shrubs and bushes, they can be quite a handful. And you just seem to keep going and going and going. If you can stand back and look at it across the room and it pulls together and makes sense, then it's probably complete. Redoing these highlights because gouache dries a little darker, and I find that I have to push the highlights even more. Now using a sort of a grayish blue-violet to add more colorful shadows, lightening them up just a little as well, but they still obviously read as shadows, darker and cooler than the light around them. But I prefer a colorful shadow to one that's just basically a black kind of color. I don't think that lifts a painting, and I want to just lift the painting in a sense of light and atmosphere. So bright and sunny, colorful shadows, cool shadows, warm lights. The utility poles just white and lemon yellow. Also emphasize the idea of bright light. So these smaller details, just highlights here or there, and that's all it really takes. Let the mind fill in the details. A few spots of highlights. Now, once I'm happy with the overall light effect in the scene, I'm going to add a figure. Just a figure to add a bit of scale and human interest. Very loose. Just a torso and the legs at different lengths, so he looks like he's walking. Small head and a little touch of a highlight. And of course a shadow to join the figure to the landscape and sign it off, and there it is. So it is a little more complex, but certainly not too difficult and well worth trying out for yourself. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little painting. I had a lot of fun painting it myself, and as you probably see, there are stages of the painting where it might not be looking so great, and you get that sort of ugly middle stage as well. And then a few steps further, you can pull it all together and get that burst of light. Now, if you want to find out more about gouache painting, I've got a few gouache courses on my painting school. You can find out more about them. Follow the link up here or in the description and check those out for yourself. Okay, if you want to find out more about my forthcoming YouTube videos, the best way is to subscribe to this channel, hit notifications, and you won't miss the next painting lesson or demonstration. Until next time, happy painting and cheers for now.